A mammoth project with the potential to transform Africa's energy landscape. That's the Dangote Refinery project. The suspense surrounding the launch of this mega project may finally be coming to an end, as Africa's largest industrial project is set to launch this Monday, May 22, with Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari there to inaugurate it. The 650,000 barrel per day refinery is based on the Lekki Peninsula east of Lagos. The project, 7 times the size of Victoria Island, a main commercial hub in Nigeria's capital, has 130 kilometers of roads linking a series of complex units. Now, sub-Saharan Africa currently needs to import about 700,000 barrels a day of diesel to meet its daily need. If everything goes according to plan, the $19 billion facility, some expect will meet 100% of Nigeria's requirement of all refined products and also have a surplus of each of these products for export. However, the project has been delayed for a multiplicity of reasons. With South Africa losing a huge percentage of its refining capacity recently, the refining capacity on the continent as a whole has diminished considerably, with about 80% of the continent's diesel needs still being imported. So it's clear that the launch of the refinery is key to helping plug gaps in Africa's refined oil landscape. Well, to make sense of some of these issues today in the studio and to discuss the impact of the refinery on the economic and energy landscape, first is Bismarck Rewane, renowned economist and Managing Director and CEO of Financial Derivatives Company Limited. Thanks for joining us today in the studio, Mr. Rewane. Great to have you, as always. Now, we briefly talked about this before coming on.
Yes.
Is the Dangote Refinery going to be the panacea for Nigeria's economic, or if you like, energy sector problems? Help us put some perspective on this.
Well, I think the way to understand this is to, first of all, clear the myths. There are a lot of myths and stereotypes. Dangote Refinery is a Hail Mary pass that will solve Nigeria's numerous and myriad problems. One, that is not true. The Dangote Refinery is a major milestone on the path towards achieving macroeconomic stability. But it is not all. In other words, it's a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient to do all of it. Okay, that's not number one. Number two is that it's a $19 billion project. And you just alluded to the fact that South Africa's refining capacity has been mostly shut in. The new concept of refineries is about hub. The hub, the only refinery of this magnitude, first and foremost, the largest single train refinery in the world today. The hubs that we know are Mexico, Houston, Singapore, Rotterdam, and so on, and 1 or 2 in India. Now, this refinery is going to serve basically the whole of West Africa and Central Africa, so to speak. Now, there's also a myth that once this refinery kicks in, Nigeria's foreign exchange problems in terms of the overvaluation of the naira will be solved. No, that is not correct. The reality is that what we do today is to swap crude that we would have refined domestically through the traders, and then they refine it and bring the products in. Therefore, what you give up, the export earnings of the crude, right, which you would have used to pay for the imported refined products, you are swapping it. So what happens here is that we will refine domestically, we will save the logistics of taking the crude out and bringing it in, and there will be constant availability. So I think that's number two. Therefore, it doesn't have a direct impact really on the exchange rate, but it will have an indirect impact because Dangote will be exporting the surplus after meeting the Nigerian needs, which are, in fairness, grossly exaggerated. So if that is the case, and that we actually use only about 200 or 300,000 barrels a day, then there'll be another 200 or so, if not more than 300, to export.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I think that's another thing that needs to be. But to me, the most important thing is that Nigeria has suffered over the past 3 decades from negative labor productivity growth and to a large extent negative total factor productivity growth, which means that the resources of Nigeria, both human and to a large extent material, are underutilized, are suboptimal. And one of the reasons of this is because of the bottlenecks. People spend half of their time trying to queue up for petrol, queue up for everything, because it's a bottleneck economy. If you, with one particular project, debottleneck a particular sector, i.e. crude, refining, and so on, you would have actually increased the probability of having higher productivity, both human productivity, labor productivity, and resource, capital stock productivity significantly. Therefore, you could see, maybe down the road, a spike in GDP growth, maybe from 2-3% averagely to around 4-5%, because of the debottlenecking of this particular sector, which is critical to Nigeria's economic fortunes.
Yeah. Indeed, and thanks for laying out some of the key issues. But one of the things that we've seen is that there's been quite a lot of expectation around what this would mean for other parts of the economy. We haven't even got to perhaps some of the environmental issues around it. But in terms of the positioning of this refinery as being able to enable job creation and some of the ancillary benefits and indirect job creation, how would you assess even the process of constructing and developing the refinery, turning it into this mega project that's meant to enable and be a catalyst for other types of infrastructure? Do you think even up to now we've seen that actual contribution to economic development?
I think there are two issues here. One is the real productivity impact in terms of having a project grounded and developing a project, formulating things. The second part is that the signaling effect that somebody, an entrepreneur, right, has the confidence to commit such significant resource to this market. And if what is he seeing, or what is the Dangote group seeing that others are not seeing? If you go back and rewind, you find that he saw that opportunity in cement and did it, and that was a big success. He has seen this opportunity here and is committing resources to it. So will others now see in other sectors, not necessarily in refining, will others see opportunities in this market that, in spite of all these stories of doom and gloom, that beneath all of this, there's a big, massive consumer market in Nigeria. So I think that's the first and most important thing, distinguishing between the direct impact in terms of goods and services and the psychological impact in terms of the mental capacity to take risks for Nigeria, and that if you take risks in a sector, or any sector for that matter, that is critical to the needs of the people, you are bound to succeed. I think that's the most important thing. But having said that, there are the environmental issues, and there's the danger that as we move into the renewable energy space and the obsolescence of crude oil, but that's going to take a long time before crude oil comes. So if you go back in economic history, the iron and coal, the iron and steel industrial revolution, it took almost 300 to 400 years before Newcastle and others actually became obsolete. So I would imagine that for Nigeria, oil-producing countries, both in the upstream, downstream, and midstream, there's still a long way to go. So the fears that, why are you investing in a technology that is going to become obsolete, I think are a bit are exaggerated for now, but the fears still exist. And so that is it. But oil is the golden goose for Nigeria. And you've got to tap it, and you've got to utilize that and harvest it now. And then the question is, what are you doing with the funds or the revenues that come from it? If you use it wisely, right, then there's a future. If you use it stupidly, then that'll be another missed opportunity. And Nigeria, quite frankly, cannot afford missed opportunities at this time.
You mentioned the signaling, but someone might look at this and argue two things. First of all, Dangote is a local investor. He probably has a higher risk appetite than your standard investor. And then the second thing is that the refinery is actually located in the free trade zone, which has other economic and investment incentives. So perhaps the signaling of what it would take to actually develop a refinery in a country, an environment like this, is probably slightly skewed because of those dynamics. I mean, what do you make of this? Is there scope to develop these types of large-scale mega projects in an economy like Nigeria, given all the challenges we even know that the refinery has faced and continues to face in order to come online?
I'm happy that you mentioned the fact of a free trade zone and all of that. But a country like Nigeria has a horrible reputation in terms of sanctity of contracts. So I'm not sure that investors are carried away by things, this concept of free trade zone, and Nigeria would honor its obligations. Nigeria will go to arbitration and meet its. We know what has happened to the Azura project, and there was a default not long ago, a few days back. And therefore, when you have a reputation for being for not being honorable, right? Even you can design all the things you like, nobody's going to take you seriously. So I take the point that Dangote is Nigerian, but Dangote, like Tata and many of these Ambani group in it, they are no longer domestic investors. They are multinational, or how would I put it? Their interests transcend borders. On Monday, they're going to have at least 5 or 6 presidents of African countries coming in for the commissioning. Not because of anything, because that's the wider market. So, but somebody has to lead the way.
Yeah.
And I think that leadership will help in sending a right signal to people that if Nigerians or a Nigerian can put his money where his mouth is, then maybe I'll take another look.
Yeah, of course. Of course, you sort of alluded to this before, and the perception is that because we have to import huge amounts of refined products now, there's a huge FX burden. But I think we want to understand a bit more the dynamics of the trading that would occur in a free trade zone.
Yes.
Would the products and the throughput from the refinery be bought and purchased in dollars, and that would still continue to mean huge demand for dollars in the domestic economy, would it not?
Yes. Either you purchase in dollars or you purchase it in crude,
with crude, with swap.
Right. Swap it, right?
Yes.
So you could say the swap now takes place in Nigeria, right? But it doesn't matter. If you give the Dangote refinery 300,000 barrels of oil, right, which you would have sold for dollars, and Dangote, you pay Dangote process it for you.
Yeah.
So Dangote buys in dollars and sells it back to you in dollars, right? So that
it's netted out the effect.
So it has no impact. What we should be looking at is if Dangote buys 500,000 barrels of oil, uses 300,000 barrels for domestic, and then exports 200,000 barrels of finished products to Ghana, Togo,
surrounding countries. Yeah.
Then those dollars become export earnings. And in the value chain, you get more for exporting refined products. Than exporting crude. So that becomes a net positive for Nigeria. But what people must not get away from are 2 things. 1, this is not going to solve all your problems. 2, that the price at which you are going to be buying refined products will not change. Therefore, if the landed cost of a liter of petrol is now, let us say $1, right? And the exchange rate you are using is X. You'll find that the landed cost of a liter of crude in Accra, in Cotonou and Lagos will have to be the same. And you're talking about something like almost 600 naira a liter, if not 700 naira a liter. Can you afford this? And if not, who is going to be paying for this? Right? Dangote is a businessman. It's not a charitable organization. So he would price it. If not, it will shut down. Yeah,
interesting. We're told we have to take a short break now, but we'll continue the discussion on this after. We've been speaking to Bismarck Rewane. I've been discussing the upcoming inauguration of the Dangote Refinery with economist and MD of Financial Derivatives, Bismarck Rewane. Joining the discussion now are Ronke Onodeko, Principal Consultant, DRNL Consult, and Uwa Osiadaye, Senior Vice President, Oil and Gas at FBN Quest Merchant Bank. Thanks for joining me. Great to have you both on the show to join the discussion. So I wanted to start with Ms. Onodeko. Nigeria's downstream sector recently has been discussed a lot in the light of the subsidy discussion. Do you have any thoughts on how this refinery coming on stream and helping to shore up our supplies domestically could impact that particular debate?
So I'm quite excited about the commissioning of the refinery for quite a few reasons. One, we've been behind on refining capacity in the country, and it has affected our foreign exchange reserves. I'm particularly interested to see how we're going to make savings from the cost of shipping out and shipping back in, and have gains from the fact that we're going to build capacity locally and move people back home who are in the industry. We're going to develop our shipping industry as well, refining, distribution. So I'm trying to see where the balance will come and where some savings. It's unfortunately not going to be a huge or a significant savings in the fact that we're not suddenly going to be saving 70%, because the refinery is going to buy crude at international market prices. You put that into net back pricing, prices of products will be significantly the same, but you'll have some savings from shipping, NPA dues, and things like that. However, he has borrowed money in foreign exchange and has to repay back in foreign exchange. So he's not going to be Nairanizing his inputs to make it comfortable for the country. But I'm quite excited that we will see some savings, we'll see some development, we'll see some more depth in the industry, as opposed to just trading retail. And we sell the crude, we bring back the products. Lots of people are the middlemen will shrink. So I'm looking forward to seeing how
that's a very interesting point you make. Every time something like this happens, there's a sense in which, as an oil-producing country, people feel we have an entitlement to cheap oil or cheap petroleum products. So one of the things that does concern me is whether this actually creates an opportunity for them to really look at the subsidy issue. In terms of policy, whether this will accelerate a move to remove the subsidy, or it's still going to be a wait and see approach.
I think there would be a bit of a window whereby subsidy removal will not be as harsh as it would be if we were still importing. And it's important that Nigerians begin to see the country as a whole and not the industries in silos and the sectors in silos. A bit of loss in oil trading and marketing and cost will add value to other sectors like infrastructure, education, healthcare. So, you're going to be paying a little bit more for your fuel, but then you will be getting a lot more in other areas. If we keep our eyes on the indices, let's have a national dashboard where we're seeing where the savings are going and ensure that the savings are really going to the sectors that are lagging behind.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, no, thanks for that point. So, Uwa, I think given the scale and the quantity of daily output that's meant to come out of the refinery, how do you think it's going to shape the evolution of regulation and policy in the downstream sector in terms of competition? What are your thoughts?
Okay, I think if you look over the last 4 to 5 years, government policy around things like subsidies has really had an eye on the resumption of this refinery. But in terms of looking ahead, what sort of policies do we expect? Already we see the drafting of the domestic crude supply obligation from the Commission, that's the upstream regulator, and the mid and downstream regulator, the authority. This sort of DSO agreement, we have seen it in the gas sector space, and the smaller refineries, so to speak, have been crying out for policy that will push volumes to their refineries as feedstock, which hasn't happened. But we can see the Commission has drafted it, and it's will be gazetted, in the coming weeks. So it's clear that federal government policy around oil and gas, especially downstream, would be pivoting on this refinery.
Yeah, it's interesting. We almost forgot the smaller refineries. We also almost forgot that Africa actually has a lot of refining projects coming upstream. Do we actually risk a glut in supplies? Can we even envisage a scenario, I don't know who wants to take that, where we end up with a glut in supplies, and actually that overall pushes the prices of products down across board? What are your thoughts?
Well, a glut in capacity.
In capacity, right, in capacity,
I feel at some point, the investment case for refinery wouldn't be wouldn't be good enough. So if you look at the nameplates for Dangote Refinery, 650,000 barrels. The NNPC refineries are 450. I mean, you have to take in consideration the NNPC is investing around $3 billion in rehabilitation currently. That's already 1.1 million barrels. Nigeria's current daily crude oil production, if you look at the past 12 months, is somewhere around 1.2, 1.3 million. So it finally matches. So, I mean, making a case for new investments at some point wouldn't be there. For me, I think the refining industry or subsector of the oil and gas industry will closely resemble what we have in the cement space, where you have three big players, 3 or 4 big players. I mean, there are some projects that may come online 2024, 2025 that are as grand as, 1 or 2 NNPC refineries. I'm speaking in particular to the Boa Refinery and petrochemical projects in Akwa Ibom.
Yeah, very interesting. I don't know, Mr. Rewane, whether you had any thoughts on some of what has just been discussed.
I think that we are conflating a number of things. One is the fiscal impact of this in terms of the subsidies. So what are you subsidizing? What are the consumers benefiting and what are the people benefiting? 2 is the fact that there's an investment. 3 is the exchange rate impact. But I want to look at it broadly. The fact that you have refineries being rehabilitated doesn't mean that they'll be viable. We've been trying to rehabilitate the refineries for the past
decades, yeah.
And they never. So an unviable project will die a natural death. Okay.
But you have a number of smaller refineries.
Yeah, those smaller refineries, depending on what the basic assumptions of the economics of it is. But in this business, a business of scale, economies of scale, globally. And therefore, when you have big scale, your average cost comes down. When you have modern technology, your output and your productivity and efficiency gains come in. When you put the two together, you're competing across West and Central Africa, it is inevitable that some of the inefficient and badly structured projects are going to die a natural death. Yeah. I think that's 1. 2 is the fact that what does this mean? This industry, there's the upstream, midstream, downstream. And basically, the big infrastructure spend is just about to begin. In other words, your pipelines, your depots, and all the other things, right? That is where the people benefit more from, right? Because if you look at the template today, you have all sorts of things that are coming in to increase those costs. If you have a pipeline coming from Escravos straight to Dangote Refinery, so you don't have the tankers coming in, and you have pipelines evacuating finished products into different depots in different parts of the country. There are huge productivity gains, right? And efficiency gains that will come out there. Those things will actually mean that the Nigerian consumer will be paying less because this project is taking place here. There's no way you can subsidize inefficient producers to be in that value chain. And then also, the whole idea is that as you go along, right, you have petrochemicals and all sorts of things. The truth is that the Nigerian government must begin to comply with best practice in all respects in terms of judicial, the administration of justice, the alternative dispute resolution, governance as a whole. When that happens, investments come in and to drive it across sectors.
Yeah,
I think that's
very, very interesting point on the broader regulatory framework. Now, we've heard a lot about all the ancillary infrastructure that will need to traverse different territories. Are you at all bothered by the environmental sustainability aspect? There's a lot of speculation in the market about fumes from the refinery and about being too closely located. Sometimes it's hard to know what is sensationalism and what is actually evidence-based. What are your thoughts on how the environmental impact should be approached?
Okay, the first thing that people need to understand is that Nigerian crude is low sulfur. It is a highly sought after crude worldwide because the sulfur levels are extremely low, and people actually buy our crude to blend with the high sulfurs to bring down their emissions. So we don't have that issue here. Nigeria has been brought into a discussion that is above our pay grade.
And what do you mean? In what sense?
We were sitting at the table with the Western world who have emission issues.
Okay.
We don't have, I mean, if you look at our side
carbon
of
footprint.
our carbon footprint is much lower. And it's a brand new refinery. The technology is better. The efficiencies are better. So I don't even see it as an issue that we should be talking about at all. But the way the international space works, if you're borrowing money from Europe or Asia, wherever, these are discussions. So I'm seeing Dangote taking advantage of carbon credits. So it should even be an income generating line item for him or for the refinery, and put us in the limelight to show the efficiencies that can be gained if all the refineries are upgraded or totally dismantled.
So in essence, this may set a new standard for
It
how
should set a new
refinery
standard.
development
Yes.
should work in a sustainable manner.
That's what I believe.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point you make, because there's all sorts of news out there about the environmental impact. And I'm sure to have got funding for that, they would have had to do an environmental impact assessment.
Yes.
Yeah, one would think, for such a world-class refinery. So Uwa, looking at competition right now in the downstream landscape and how, petroleum products are transported, we heard, several months or years back that deals had already been struck for the offtake of products for refineries. How do you think players in the downstream sector will be positioning themselves to perhaps, get some of the positive collateral from this refinery's throughput? What are your thoughts?
In terms of structure, I don't think the structure will change too much, because you will have your wholesale energy traders, picking up the bulk and distributing it to the usual suspect, the marketers that we currently have. If you think for domestic sales, I would imagine before reaching financial close, offtake arrangements are sort of things that you have to take before reaching financial close. For Nigerian sales in particular, I would say, I won't be surprised if the NNPC is keen, to be in the position to buy bulk from the refinery for domestic sales. And the reason is simple. Currently, the NNPC acts as pretty much the sole importer of gasoline, bulk importer of gasoline, has a 20% stake in this project. Post the acquisition of OVH, is the largest single distributor of petroleum products. So that's, I would imagine that wouldn't, change dramatically from an international point of view, because the refinery is positioned to export quite a bit of volumes, right? The big energy traders such as Glencore, Vitol, be positioning or might have already positioned, to participate.
And what about some of the inefficiencies we see in the current system? Most of our petroleum product transportation is via trucking.
Yes.
Right? We're still reliant on the roads, and we know what road infrastructure is like. I think for this refinery to kind of reach its full potential, even in terms of the economics, is really what other investment needs to be made in the broader infrastructure network. What are your thoughts on what should happen?
So yes, you have, very inefficient depots, or depots that the NNPC may have constructed several decades ago. What you need currently is, a network of depots across the country and infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure that would, move products right from Lekki, to the hinterland for positions in different regions. So that way, you save trucking costs. What you just spoke about, an environmental impact, it would be less. You have cost savings, and to an extent, in terms of pricing. So what's the system currently that we have, the petroleum equalization, where the government tries to, all those things would pretty much be eliminated or reduced.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting to see how that evolves. Yeah.
We have that infrastructure. This thing was built everywhere from Warri, Port Harcourt, all the way to Maiduguri, Sokoto, Kaduna, and all of that. Those things, but they were abandoned. So the cost, what you need to invest in is how to rehabilitate all of that. Once you do that, then the wear and tear on the roads will be reduced, and of course the efficiency of transporting it, and it'll be much more carbon friendly. And so I think that's it, and that is the big investment. Let me say maybe 10, 12, 15 billion dollars can rehabilitate all of this. It's there all the way to Mosimi or Ore. So everywhere it's there, and it was done in the 70s for a fraction of what we're talking about today. Now, so if that is done, then you now need the crude to take the pipelines to bring the crude to the refinery here. And then the evacuation will be done with all of this in place, distribution. So that, but then new investments, because you are going to be sending it across to West Africa. So of course, you would have tankers taking this thing out, or you can actually pipe all the way to these West African big markets like Accra, Abidjan, and all of that.
Yeah. Very, very interesting point. So, Ms. Onodeko, I wanted to ask you about the broader development impact. You know, a lot has been said about, and not necessarily from the environmental side, a lot has been said about job creation. But what do you see as to how Nigeria could leverage the presence of this refinery to kickstart a new approach to development? I know that sounds really grand and far-fetched, but what are some of the things we should really be doing right now as a country?
I think one of the things that Nigeria needs to look back into is the impact the bad fuel, I think it was 2 years ago. It got as far as Mali, Ivory Coast, Cameroon, Niger, Togo, Benin, Ghana. So there's already an informal, illegal route into all of those countries that exist. How can we turn that around and maximize that opportunity, and maximize it and turn it into an opportunity? So we really could set out a hub for not just petroleum products, but other things, if we formalize and crystallize that which already exists. If that happens, it's going to open up the sub-Saharan African cohesion in trade. And it's going to begin to help us trade with our partners. We have more to offer than we have coming in. So I see Nigerian companies extending their tentacles into all of these other countries.
Right.
I see Nigerian financial services moving with the trade.
Because of trade finance and the opportunities.
And what's going to happen is that you're going to need new skill sets, people who are more mobile, people who are more technologically driven to start finding solutions to bring this to a platform where everybody can play in. So, you know, I see technology, I see trade, I see finance. There's so many industries that have the potential to grow exponentially if they really sit and tap into it.
Yeah.
And in a short period of time, I mean, everybody remembers how when the GSM phones were coming out and people had set up shops to sell the cards. And within 6 weeks, we found out that the cards were going to be sold on the road in traffic. So I think some things are being put in place now that the natural course will deviate and meander into places where it's a lower barrier to enter those spaces. So I'm quite excited to see how it evolves and how it grows itself. We've done our bit now. It's going to do its own thing. So we should sit back, watch, and follow the natural course.
And I think you make a good point. I think there's a political economy that's going to develop around the refinery. We're already seeing quite a lot of residential and commercial businesses gravitating to that axis. But we haven't spoken much about the Dangote business itself. And Uwa, I wanted to get your thoughts as we look to wrap up. How do you think it's a conglomerate. You know, this project is not a philanthropic project. It's not it has an impact on national development, but ultimately the company's bottom line is going to be in the eye of the conversation. How do you think this impacts profitability for the company in terms of its own growth ambitions and plans?
I think it's huge. I mean, if you look at revenue estimates that are out, the projection at full capacity is somewhere around $21 billion. At, you know, I&E exchange rate, that's close to 9 trillion naira. I mean, if you look at Dangote Cement, which is currently the rainmaker for the Dangote Group, we are projecting revenues to, you know, hit 2 trillion naira next year in 2024. So easily the Dangote Refinery complex can do, you know, almost 4 or 5 times that. But looking below the revenue line, the cement industry typically has higher EBITDA margins. You know, somewhere around, over the last 5 years, Downstream, Nigeria has averaged around 60%. For refineries, much lower. So, if you put it side by side, I can easily see EBITDA doubling for the group just based on these 2 projects. Ignoring sugar and all these entities.
Okay. Yeah, very interesting. So just one more thing, you know, there is a huge opportunity here for the incoming administration, because it's coming at a time where there's a large marquee nameplate project coming on board. How do you think this project positions Nigeria in terms of macroeconomic planning? Because it really gives the new government leverage, I think, from an economic perspective, to tell a good story very early on. So based on this project now coming on stream, what do you think the main priority around positioning this project as a watershed moment for the administration?
Yes, a very interesting question. The truth is that Nigeria, at this point, is facing a major debt crisis in terms of we have bunched up maturities. We are in default in one or two payments. The external imbalances are mammoth. Therefore, if you have a project that is internationally competitive, you can use this as an opportunity. Okay, now we want to come back. We want to restructure our debt. We want to reschedule some of our obligations. We need to go back into the markets to do a number of things. Here we are. There's a project by a Nigerian group of this magnitude, right, situated in a export zone, trade zone, and all of that. It sends a signal that Nigeria wants to be compliant with best practice, right? And therefore, as you appoint your advisors to go and negotiate terms for your scheduling of your debt and meeting with the Troika of the IMF, the World Bank, and the London Club, this becomes a very pivotal moment for Nigeria, I think, for the incoming administration to send a signal that, yes, we are doing this.
Yeah.
And we have a program for phasing out subsidies. And we have a program for meeting our debt obligations.
Thank you.
All at this time put together. I think that would be an excellent opportunity.
And a great note to end on. It's been such a pleasure to have you all, Mr. Bismarck Rewane, Ms. Ronke Onadeko, and Uwa Osadiaye. We've been talking about the Dangote Refinery. Well, let's hope all goes well with the inauguration on Monday. That's all for Business Week. You can catch up with all your top business stories here on Arise News over the course of the week. Thanks for watching. I'll be here again next weekend with more analysis on top global business stories. In the meantime, do send me a tweet online to continue the conversation. I'm Rolake Akikugbe Filani. Bye for now.